Hey, John, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, Tom.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure. So if you haven't met John yet, Jon Nastor, is that how we say your last name?
Nastor, yep.
Jon Nastor. Jon
Like
Nastor is
master, but
gotcha. Jon Nastor is the author of Hack the Entrepreneur and founder of the Hack the Entrepreneur podcast show with over 2.4 million downloads. John helps entrepreneurs, artists, and creative people learn how to create great products and services and get customers to fall in love with the business. It's great to have you.
it's great to be here.
Yeah, so tell us about your background, how you got started as an artist and then as a business person.
Sure, yeah. And interestingly enough, they're actually tied together really, because I started in punk rock playing drums in a band in a very small town in Canada, and nobody wanted to put on shows for us. And so I guess I discovered this about myself very early on. Rather than complaining about people doing it for me, I just did it myself. And we started putting on shows. Bands that would be coming through, we would rent a hall, put on the show, buy pop and stuff, and sell it for more money, pay the bands. Our bands would get to play. And then we eventually got to meet other bands in other cities and take ourselves on the road. So from that age, which I didn't realize that was like entrepreneurship, but looking back, that's it. That's where it comes from. Everything I do still is based around that ethic of complain that it doesn't exist or that this problem is an issue. Just fix it yourself, because you're probably not the only one with that problem, is what I've found making software over the years. And you can just sell it to the other thousands of people just like you, because we're not unique snowflakes, and there's other people with our problem.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to just put it right straight back to punk rock and just that whole DIY ethic.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of how most entrepreneurs get started, is you find a problem that you have in your own life, you find a way to solve it, you find out people are willing to pay for it, and then you grow from there.
Exactly. But then like in my early 20s, I went into service-based. It was offline, and it was a nightmare. It sucked. Dealing with customers face to face and having to leave the house all the time. All that stuff was a nightmare. So then I was figured out the whole internet thing and refused to go back.
Mm-hmm. Are you kind of an introvert?
Yeah, I am. I am. I love going to conferences and meetups and stuff, but it exhausts me mentally, where I just, at the end of a weekend, I'm wiped out for 3 or 4 days. I enjoy it when I'm there, but it's hard on me.
Yeah, likewise. Same here for sure. I think there's a lot of people listening that can relate too.
So yeah, I'm a drummer. I behind the scenes, so when I played hockey, I was a goalie and was in the back. It's just where I like to be, I guess, because of that introversion.
Mm-hmm. So why did you start the Hack the Entrepreneur podcast show?
So 2 reasons, I guess. One was selfishness. I really wanted to speak to entrepreneurs, and I figured that if I just emailed them, they would probably not have time just to talk to me. So I thought I'll start a podcast. And so if you ask somebody to be on your podcast, they'll say yes. If you ask them just to get on Skype and talk for an hour, they'll probably say I'm really too busy. So it was that selfish reason. And then also there was a gap in the market. There was a very, very obvious gap. And there was this gap in the entrepreneurship space 2 years ago when I started, of talking about mindset. There was lots of tactics, tons of tactics, like how to do this, how to do that, 3 steps to do this. And that stuff's all awesome. But I had found in my sort of journey, it wasn't tactics that had got me to where I was. It was taking action on tactics, obviously, but it was this mindset that I had just overcome, this whole entrepreneurial thing. And I wanted to talk to other people and sort of help them understand that you have it within you. You just have to kind of get your head around it. So with that gap in the market, again, I was I wish it existed. So I could have waited. There's lots of them now. I could have waited, but instead I took advantage of that. I capitalized on it, I guess you could say, on that gap in the market, and I filled it with a show strictly talking about the mindset of an entrepreneur.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. That's awesome. And I think that's kind of a common theme on our show as well. A lot of entrepreneurs and a lot of authors are talking about is that it's not just the tactics that made them successful. It was the mindset. It was overcoming their fears and their limiting beliefs and all the inner obstacles that were stopping them from actually moving forward and making progress.
Yeah, exactly. It's 2 years later now, and there's just a ton of it. It's awesome. The gap in the market doesn't exist anymore. I'm sure there are 50 gaps in the market of entrepreneurship podcasts right now. I'm not looking for another show, but the gaps are there. They're always there in the marketplace, unless it gets completely saturated and it's like hoverboards or something silly that was huge last Christmas. Like, okay, there's no gap. But for those kinds of things, there are gaps, but the gap isn't the same as it was 2 years ago.
Mm-hmm. So when you talk about finding gaps, like, why is that important to find a gap in the market?
I guess for a couple of reasons. So one is that competition is a good thing. You don't want to come up with an idea and then go to Google, type in your idea, and it's never existed before. Because it probably has existed and it failed. And because there was no market for it, per se. So the first thing you want is you want a marketplace around what it is you're going to create. It's too hard. It's not for us small operations to be trying to create markets. So you want the market, and then you just can't come in the same. You can't come in the same as another product on, doesn't matter what market, if it's a podcast, if it's a book, if it's a piece of software, you can't come in exactly the same as another thing, because you won't. One thing, they're ahead of you. They've already started. They've got an audience. They've got customers. They've got listeners, whatever it happens to be. So they're ahead of you in that. But if you can come in different, and if there's like two big players in whatever market you're in, there's this gap right up the middle. And you just have to figure out what that is. And then come in that way, and you can position yourself as filling that gap. And there's always going to be people, not only that are waiting for that gap to be filled, but then also people from either side that are going to be like, oh, interesting, this is actually more what I wanted, but this was the closest there was for me at the time. And it's just where you want to be. It's kind of where like the people lie, and where in these things. It's filling that void and trusting your gut that because you're filling it in a way that helps you, it's also going to help other people.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I think that makes a lot of sense. And it also directly applies to the book business, because I think a big mistake a lot of authors make is they write like a Me Too book, which is just like, Think and Grow Rich, or like, insert any famous best-selling book. And they write a book that's like, they're trying to be like the next best or the same as something else, rather than coming at it in the gap in the market where there's a new space, right? And so whenever you're creating that kind of product, that's basically just a commodity. It's not special. It's not unique. There's already an entrenched competitor out there with millions of copies sold. It's really hard to get people to notice you and actually take a chance on you unless you have something unique to share.
Exactly. And to me, it's a fundamental positioning and creator's mistake. I say software because this is where I come from, but you don't want to create something and then figure out how you're going to sell it. You want to know how you're going to sell it and then create it. One thing, it's going to help you create a better product that fits that gap perfectly. And then also, once it's created, you know how to sell it. That's the problem. We read Think and Grow Rich, and then it's like, I'm going to write one of these. And then all of a sudden, the end of the book, you're like, oh, great. Now, how do I sell this thing? That's the problem, right? We all have that issue. It's like, oh, we're all sitting on books because it's like, well, how do we sell it? And it's like, you got to rethink it. You got to figure out how you're going to sell it. And then if it doesn't make sense, it's no big deal. It's like, wow, I could never sell written by Jon Nastor, because they just can't find a position in the market that would make sense, where somebody wouldn't be just like, why don't I just buy Think and Grow Rich? The actual book, right? But then it's not any work, because it's not like, well, I spent the last 8 months writing this book. And it's like, now I'm not going to spend the time, right? But when you find something like this book, when I place that I could put this book into and how I could sell it, I knew the exact sort of process I could sell it through. It was simple to write. From like 9 weeks from the time I decided to write this book and emailed my friend to the time I launched it on Amazon. That was it. I'd never written a book in my life, but I knew exactly what I was going to do with it on December 10th of 2015, which was my created, because I was perfectly. Then it was like, okay. And now it just helped me figure out the book and write it because I knew exactly who I was going to sell it to and how. I just had to make the perfect book for them.
So talk about a little bit more about that process then when you're planning out this book. How did you find that gap in the market and how did you fill it?
The gap in the market was fitting my audience perfectly. So my audience is from that gap of mindset. They're very, very like mindset oriented of the entrepreneurs, but they're also like getting started or else even haven't quite started yet. And they have good jobs and they are listening to my show and trying to get their mindset around the fact that they are indeed entrepreneurs. And so I had 200 episodes at the time, and I needed to, actually no, it was 150 episodes at the time. So I just started thinking about how I could sort of do this, which was a process of just, I don't know exactly, but I'm going to take 50 of my interviews and I'm going to break it down. And then my site was already broken down by 5 categories: mindset, habits, getting started, all that stuff. And those work. People love those categories. And that's how we categorize my shows. So I was like, okay, well, I have the 5 categories for the book. I have 150 episodes to like interviews to choose from. I need to choose 50. So I have to just start this process. But obviously I can't have like the getting 25 long and then 25 throughout the next. So I was like, well, there's 5 categories, 50, I need 10 for each. And it was literally a process of, I'm obsessed with just yellow Post-it notes, of just figuring out who all the interviews were, what they were talking about, and then making it so I had 10 of each one across. And it was like, okay, so the whole book needs an intro, the whole book needs an outro, each of the 5 sections needs an intro and an outro, and that was the process. And then all of this from a giant table, it took about a week to like completely figure it out and then get approval from the guests to be in the book, then just transferred over to a Trello board. Then I worked directly with me and we just started. And she was amazing. She just took control from the Trello board, was like, hey, Jon, today you have to write this, this, and this. It has to be 300 words. This one has to be 400. This one has to be 500. And that was it. It was just completely like disjointed. And it was all based off of the Trello board, filling the gap that my audience is part of. Isn't a gap anymore, really, if that makes sense, because I filled that, right? Those are those people. We're in that place. So, I mean, it's going to be hard for somebody to come right behind me in the exact same spot because that gap is audience and me. And so my book was just sort of coming in and becoming like just a physical version of my podcast, if you will.
Yeah, well, that's a good point. That because once you create the podcast, you create this gap in the market, right? And you fill that gap, and now you have an audience. And so once you have an audience, you're at a very different place from an entrepreneur who's just starting out. And so you can add on new products, new services, additional things to offer to that same audience to really expand your business and expand the value that you're adding to people.
Yeah, and that's a great point that I totally missed. This wasn't even my idea. This is my audience's idea. There was the final email came, and then 3 days later I emailed my friend and I was just like, I have to write this. Like they literally laid out the book, like you should have a book and it should be, and then eventually it was like, it should be the 5 sections of your site. Then it should be, and I was like, oh my God, you guys are awesome. And so it just got to the point where it was like, okay, I guess I have to write a book, which I never imagined myself doing. But yeah, there was like an audience, they're literally asking me just to like, dude, just write this book. So I did. And that's how kind of the process was. Okay, now that I have this like rough idea, that's how I put it together.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. Well, I think this is such a great example of the entrepreneurial story, right? Because, and how the journey that we all go through. Because, when you first start out, starting a business or writing a book or whatever, it's like you don't go to school to start a business. You don't go to school to be an artist, right? So like when my brother studied to become a doctor, he spent 8 years in school preparing to be a doctor. So before, like 8 years before he became a doctor, he knew that's where he was going to go, right? But it's like the opposite journey for an artist, for an entrepreneur, because you go through this process where you start to write a book or you start to start a business or start selling, like you did, start organizing shows, and you don't even know who you are, what you're doing until afterwards. Then you look back and then you say, oh, I'm already an entrepreneur because I've been doing this for like 5 years, right? So it's kind of this very different journey. And what you mentioned about, your audience asking you to write this book is, I think what a lot of people don't understand at the beginning of that journey is maybe you only have an idea for one book or one podcast show or one product. But if you go down that journey and you keep making progress and you have the right mindset and you're always adding value to your audience, maybe 5 years from now, you'll have another book or another product or another service or another business, but you won't know if you don't take that journey and keep moving forward. I think that's why hacking the entrepreneur, why having that mindset is so important, is because if you're not moving forward on your current opportunities, those future opportunities won't come to you. You won't have a chance to do that because you didn't take advantage of the steps right in front of you. And I think that's why mindset is so important, is to keep us focused on, okay, what can I do today to actually make a difference?
Boom, we're done. That's all we need. It's so true, man. That's like 2 years ago, last month was when I started Hack the Entrepreneur. Before that, even that summer, I spent 2 months creating the show. I had never interviewed anybody in my life. I hated the sound of my own voice. I couldn't talk into a microphone. I was in a town in Canada in the middle of nowhere. And I was just going to create 30 shows because I wanted to talk to those 30 people just because I wanted to, because I knew it would help me in my business. And that was it. I was going to cancel the show. I was going to go back to software, and it was going to be cool. I had time to do it. I had the freedom. And then it kind of spiraled into its own thing. And so, like me working with Copyblog or me working with like Entrepreneur, all these things that I never would have guessed. You're right. Like I couldn't have planned this. I couldn't have planned that. If you had asked me 2 years ago, one thing if I had a podcast listened to by like 100,000 people every month, and if I had a book that like thousands of people have read, dude, no. It's not it's not in the cards for me. It's just how it is. I didn't think I could write, and I didn't think I could speak into a microphone. But doing the process, it's okay. I'm only going to do 30 episodes. Perfect. That's cool. Then I'll go back to what I was doing, but it'll be fun. It'll push myself. And then all of a sudden, here we are, 280 something episodes later, 2 years later, talking about it. But I had no idea. But I just took the step. That's it, right? Take that step and figure the rest out as you go.
Exactly. Like, there's no rule book, right? There's no guidebook. There's no school. There's no class you can go to. It's going to teach you everything about how to start your business and grow it from 0 to $1 million, right?
That's as close as there is.
Yeah. Awesome. So let's talk about the mindset then. So let's talk about, you mentioned the 5 areas of your book. What are they and why are they important?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the 5 areas of my book aren't, I guess they are sort of all mindset. But at about episode 100, this is how it worked. Episode 100, no, about episode 70, I got picked up by Copyblogger Media's podcast network, and they asked me to be on it. And they wanted to build me a new site. As they were building me a new site, we already had 75 episodes, and I was doing 3 a week, so we had to kind of find a way to organize them, I thought. So people could kind of pick it. So I looked at all the shows we had, the data we had, and then I categorized them at that point. Wrong, and sort of like understanding your fears. Oh, and then there was fears. Sorry, there's being wrong, which is just like being wrong, but then not stopping, because that's all. Constantly make mistakes and just keep going, right? Then there was fears, then there was habits, then there was just the mindset section itself, and then ideas. I found that my audience, which I didn't really expect, but they're fascinated by where do we come up with ideas for new businesses, new products, new podcasts, new books. And so there's a whole section just on that. And those were literally, I had just picked the 5 from what I saw was kind of being talked about on my show and what was popular. And we did that. We tested the data, and they all got like clicked a ton. People love those things. So it was just a logical step then, 8 months later when I started writing the book, that it's like, well, there's the sections. They're there, right? Like, why would I try something new? So it's all just a sequence. Like, it's all from the show to just as a big mess to narrowing it down to 5. And it's like, well, those 5 work and people like them, and they asked me to write a book about it. So why would I create 5 new sections? I have the sections. that's it. It's just an iterative sort of process, right? Which again comes from software, and just everything starts out really small and really kind of embarrassing and terrible. And you listen to my first 10 or 15 or 20 or 30 or 40 or 50, terrible. I didn't know how to interview people. I was all nervous, talked about myself too much. But it was just a process of iteration, getting better, making the shows better, making them more concise, getting to them, getting feedback from my audience and sort of learning who my audience was. And then that's it. And now giving them what they need to kind of take them on that.
I think that's a great lesson to take away from that, which is that you didn't try to reinvent the wheel, right? So you already had these 5 sections on your podcast. You knew they were successful with your audience. And, you could have easily just come out and said, hey, I'm Jon, I'm brilliant, I'm a genius, I'm going to go write this whole new book with all these new ideas, and then no one's going to ever see anything like this before. But you were open to the feedback you got from your audience who said, hey, these should be your ideas, these should be your categories, this is how the book should be laid out. And I think as a problem a lot of creative people have is that they're not willing to take that feedback from other people. Like if it's not their own idea, then they can't accept it, right? And they'll fight back, they'll resist that idea. And then maybe, a week later or a month later or 5 years later, they'll look back and say, oh, well, maybe that was a good idea, maybe I should have done that.
So this is an interesting sort of extension of that, which I didn't realize 285 episodes ago. That's why my first 50 episodes were terrible. I talked about myself a lot. I tried to be brilliant Jon in the middle of it so that my audience would know I was brilliant. And it sucked. Nobody cared. Nobody wanted it. And it was annoying for my guest. So I've pulled myself out of it, out of the conversations, out of the book, out of anything I write. It's not about me. It's not for me. Nobody's reading my email because they want to know about me. They want to know about themselves. They want to go on this journey, right? And so this is a huge, huge thing. This transformed my show. The reason why I'm in the way that it is, I think, is because of this. Is because of the fact that it's always about my listener. It's always about my reader. And when I have a guest on the show, it's not even about the guest. It's always about my listener. My listener doesn't get to sit there with my guest. I have to be the one who knows my guest, my audience so well that I know when my guest says something, I know my listener's like, oh, but what about this? And I have to ask that question. And that's it. And then I stop. It's not about me. It's not about me. The less I say on my show, the less I say about myself in a book, the more people seem to like me, like from my audience. And that's completely counterintuitive. It's a beginner's mistake and mentality that I had, which was, I want to be known. I want to be known as this Jon in the podcast. Now I have artwork for my show that has my face on it from the side. But that was literally like 150 episodes into it or something. Like before that, it was literally just a yellow thing because there was honestly a color gap in the market on iTunes where I saw the top entrepreneur shows and there was no yellow show. And I literally made bright yellow, simple artwork off of Fiverr to fit a gap so that it would stand out. And it wasn't about me. There was so you just have to, it's one of those things that I know I can tell you to not make it about you, and I know you're not going to listen. You're going to want to, but you're going to do it anyways. And then in a couple of months, you're going to start pulling yourself out of it, and your audience is going to grow. Your audience is going to love it because it's about them every single time. We're selfish in that way that we're listening to you, we're reading for ourselves, to help ourselves, or to learn something, or to be taken somewhere else. We're not learning it so we know more and more and more about you. But at the same time, through that, we want to learn more about you.
Absolutely.
And we will.
So how have you figured out who your audience is and what they really want? How do you get in the mind of your customer, of your reader, of your listener?
I don't shelter myself from them. So I write an email Monday to my email list. I literally write it that day and send it out. It's usually, I call it like the kick in the butt to get you going, get you through. It's like a motivational sort of just, here it is, from something that I learned throughout the week that helped me. And I get a ton of like replies through that. And that's what I've always This is me. This isn't an autoresponder. This comes to my phone. This comes to my laptop. And we talk a lot through there. And then also we've done surveys, I think 3 or 4 maybe surveys now, where we've asked like a lot of questions. And this was for sponsorships, but like I know income levels. I know what people do for a living, how much they spend on entertainment. I know how much they spend on food. I know so much about them. It's kind of freaky in that way. And that's just through talking to them a ton, really, really, truly listening and trying to help, and then just surveying and literally taking data. And I have like spreadsheets of data. But I don't think I would have done that unless I was really going after sponsors, because it's kind of weird. It's a lot of information that you don't really need like to just know. But I mean, it really, everything I say, every time I do an introduction on my show, every time I do an outro, anytime I do anything, I literally know the person I'm talking to. I know that so well. It just happens that there's like 100,000 of them now. But it's still for that person, and I know where they're listening. I know what they're doing that day. I know where they're going. I know what they're going to spend their money on. It's crazy. But it helps. It really helps me always stay focused on them, and like what is in their life that I can like sort of take them to this next place.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, I think that's one of the things that sets great entrepreneurs apart is that they actually listen to their audience. They actually care enough about their audience to fall in love with them enough to want to learn more, right? Because like every entrepreneur loves their product or loves their service. It's easy, right, to like love your book or love your podcast show or love the product that you created. But I think to fall in love with your audience, that you care enough about them and their experience that you're willing to change the product, to change the business, to fulfill your audience's needs. I think that, would you say that's kind of a crucial part of it as well?
So this is interesting. I've never thought about this before, but when you said it, I care deeply about my audience. I think they're amazing, amazing people. Anytime I've got to meet, anytime we've gone on road trips, I've like met with people in cities and they blow my mind all the time. But when you say that we love our products and our shows or our books, I don't love my show. And I don't love my book, in a weird way. Like, and I don't mean like that I think it's, well, I do. I don't think that anything I've created yet is good enough for my audience, which is maybe it's essential. And I've never thought about this until now. So I'm just kind of going with this, but maybe the fact that every single time I record an episode, which is 3 times a week, I don't think it's good enough. I don't think it's, and I don't re-record stuff. Like, I don't mean that. I don't have a problem publishing. Like, I literally take, it goes to the editor and it gets published. But I always feel like I need to do more. I feel like I need to be pushing myself and like kind of being on the edge of like where I am growing. Like, I always need to be like really uncomfortably feeling like I'm learning something new and trying to make it a better show, a better book, a better podcast, a better email. I haven't done anything yet that I felt like, there it is. That is awesome. And I feel amazing about that. Like, you know what I mean? Everything is kind of a week later or a month later, even a day later. Sometimes it's just like, oh God, that's terrible. I need to do better next time. I need to do better because them to where they need to be yet. Like, people should really be able to pick up this book and start something really cool and like change their lives and their families' lives. And if they don't, that's my fault. It's not their fault. I screwed up somewhere along the lines because that's the promise of the book, but it's my fault. You know what I mean? So I don't know, maybe that's what's essential, is to actually not love your work, but love who you're creating it for so much that you're going to be pushed to the ends of yourself, to constantly be feeling uncomfortable and pushing yourself to grow personally so that you can then hopefully like help other people go too.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So how do you, I mean, you talked about, loving the improvement, loving making it better, making the next show better. How do you actually go about making those improvements? Like, what habits or mindset do you have around that you actually focus on each day to make it better?
With my show, I'm obsessed with like interviews, and becoming like a really good interviewer, which attention really to interviews before. But like Charlie Rose, those kind of things, like I watch way too much of it. I just reread a book for the second time. I literally just finished it last night, called Everybody Loves You When You're Dead.
Great book. Love that book.
It's amazing. And literally just for the interviews, some of those questions to me are amazing. And it's just like, I'm trying to get into like, why are these questions so good? And like, how can I steal this and like bring it to entrepreneurship? So that's it. And like, to me, I'm really thinking that I'm actually getting not interviewing anymore, which is cool. Like, I'm not good by any means, but it does make me happy that I'm realizing that just that small aspect is such a huge, crazy art form. And it's pretty cool. And so, and I know that my audience doesn't notice it, but they're not supposed to. They're not supposed to know that, like, they're just supposed to be patient. And the better I can make it just like flawless and they don't feel like they're listening to a podcast conversation, that they're actually right there. That's my job. And I really just want to make that better. I want to keep focusing on like, who are the right guests for my show. I'm learning that the right guests aren't just the biggest names creating massive things, because it's too and but again, at the beginning, that's all I did. That's all we all do, I think, because it strokes our ego, right? I got to interview Seth Godin. Cool. But it doesn't take my audience where they need to be, right? They've heard Seth Godin a lot, and Seth Godin's way the heck up here, and they're down here. They need the person right here in front of them. And so I've found that I need to bring in guests like that. And it really does help my audience more. But it's harder on my ego, and it's realizing it's not about me. So I guess it's a humbling experience, and focusing on the interviews and then focusing on who the best sort of guest is to bring my audience to where they need.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, you mentioned it's humbling. I mean, I think that's such a great thing that all people that you admire in business tend to be humble, right? It's not the people who are bragging about all their success and bragging about what they've done. It's the people who are willing to listen and willing to learn more, who you think, wow, like that's such a cool person. You know, he's a billionaire, but he's still willing to learn. He's still having a conversation with a janitor like their peers, rather than like looking down on everyone like, I'm so good and you're not, right? And I think that's what you're talking about with interviewing your guests, is that the guests that people can relate to, the guests who are humble, people who are still hungry, who are still working, that's who people relate to. They don't relate to someone who's just, retired on the beach with $1 billion in the bank, because that's how they are now, but that's not what got them to the success they have achieved, right? It was the hunger and the humility and the working and the proving that they got them there.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely. Yeah, you got it.
So what is kind of your favorite mindset hack or mindset trick that you've learned over the years?
My favorite mindset hack, I'm going to have to, what am I going to say here for this? It's decisive. And I probably took too long to say decisiveness. I should have been more decisive on it. But I didn't realize the impact that just that ability to make decisions quickly and with just absolute, like, in your gut, like you feel like, yes, this is it. And that can be for this to like literally just life-changing things. But I mean, all day as an entrepreneur, you have to make decisions. To where do I start? To where do I go next? Where do I go next? What happens with, you just have to do it. And there's endless information and data out there around us. You have to get that ability to sort of just be like, okay, from what I know right now at this very moment, what's the decision? Which direction do I go? Left or right? And that's it. Or forward or backwards. It doesn't matter. But that ability to make a decision is, after like talking to 280 something brilliant entrepreneurs, that's literally the one thing I've synthesized from people, is that ability. And those different, like all 280 people have made a different decision at the beginning, but they made the decision. And the businesses and the people that I think fail and go out of business, and going out of business is one thing because you make a decision and you keep going. but then go back to like getting a job and all those kinds of things, are the people that literally just sort of freeze up with indecision. Decision is absolutely what kills most businesses and most creativity, bar none. I don't care if if your decision's right or wrong. You can fix it in 10 minutes or an hour or a day or a week. It doesn't matter with your new information, but learn to make a decision right now and move forward.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think that's absolutely crucial as well. Can you give us an example of like a time when you didn't make a decision and that cost you?
Yeah. So this one's painful, but my last software business, actually, like, for a long-winded story reason of like why it ended up sort of failing, I realized that it was failing for almost 7 months. And then it wasn't until this past about mid-March that I finally like got the team together and just shut it down. And it's changed like my life since then. I feel so much better. I feel mentally better. I feel business is better because that's not hanging over me. But I failed. I knew it. I knew it was wrong for months and months and months and months. And I just failed to make that decision to just cut the losses and move on. And to just like accept that like there's like sunk costs, that it just doesn't matter. You just have to move on. But that one was brutal. Like the business was still literally like making money. There's like customers kind of flying through it. And during that meeting, it literally went and took down the buy button. And the site's still there, but you can't buy it. And it was just something that I had to do, but I failed to be decisive about it. And it didn't cost me financially or something like that, but it cost me mentally. And it held me back for, I'm going to say, a good 6 months. And that's hard. It's hard to face. It was a hard sort of failure on my part now. But yeah, that was a hard one, because that Sunday I had to write the email and I wrote about that. And that was a hard one. But I mean, tons of responses and it was cool, but these things happen, right? They happen to everyone. I'm not just here saying that I do everything perfectly. I don't. But that decisiveness, man, it's absolutely essential. Absolutely essential.
Absolutely. I totally agree. Well, you mentioned, it didn't cost you financially, right? But I think that's the thing, is that when you have this decision looking over your head where you put it off for so long, is that it even like the cost, the mental cost, the emotional cost, the spiritual cost, the time cost, the energy cost, all the time you spend worrying about it, that cost is like a real cost, right? And it's really easy to just like, wake up in the morning and say, oh, I'm not going to worry about that today. And then to do it the next day and the next day and the next day. And I think that, you make a great point that decisiveness is what allows you to have that freedom to move on, to really focus on what you're doing wholeheartedly, and to have your energy in the right place. Because, a big part of business is not just, the money or the financial stuff. It's the ideas, it's the creativity, it's the passion that you have that goes into it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And to me, it brings confidence, making decisions because your gut tells you, like my gut told me it was the right decision months and months before I actually acted on it. And that's a weird, incongruent sort of feeling with your body and your mind, right? And then making it and then walking away from it even an hour later and just being like, feels so much better. And then you just feel confident. You feel like, damn right, man, I can do this. This is awesome. Like, it's no longer a failure. The failure is instantly behind you. And now you have a success because you made that decision to can it and move on to bigger and better things. Mm-hmm. And that confidence that's worth more than anything. Because that's going to like lead you to big, big, big and better things.
Absolutely. That's such an amazing point. I've never thought of it that way before, that making that decision turns a failure into a success, right? Because we talk about that a lot on this show, like, turning failure into success. But I think you're right. Is like there's that moment of decision that changes everything for you.
Now the last thing behind you is a success.
Because you made that successful decision. That's so awesome. I think that's a highlight to end the show on, Jon. This has been an amazing interview. I really appreciate it. But before you go, where can people find out more about you and connect with you?
Hacktheentrepreneur.com. It's my home on the internet. It's the best place. Right at the top, there's a place to put your name into your email into there, get on my newsletter. And as I said, that literally that first welcome email that comes to you, hit my phone or my laptop, follow up with this conversation if you wish. But yeah, that's the best way by far to get a hold of me.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Jon. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. My pleasure, man. Thanks for having me.